My conversation today is with author, artist, film director, and alchemist Brian Cotnoir. His latest book, On Alchemy, Essential Practices and Making Art as Alchemy, is a major release, bridging inner spiritual work with the outer creative life. Few alchemical authors are able to achieve the penetrating understanding, clarity, and cohesiveness found in Brian's works, which must certainly be one of the reasons for its near-universal acclaim. In conversation, Brian has an incredible breadth of knowledge and enthusiasm for spirituality, creativity, and history, which made this conversation extremely easy and enjoyable. We sat down to discuss the alchemical tradition, art, his publishing company Kepri Press, his new book, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. So I'm interested. You're a multi-talented guy, really. Filmmaker, author, alchemist. What drew you to alchemy in particular among the Western esoteric traditions?
This is happenstance, actually, but more than that. When I was in grammar school, this is how far back it goes, I had gotten my adult library card rather early. I read a lot and was a good reader and kind of plowed through the kids section. So, with some letters and things like this, so after school, I used to go and do my homework there, right? Proper nerd. Did my homework and then, had about a half an hour before I had to get home for dinner. And one of my favorite pastimes then, and still is now, is sort of wandering at random through the stacks of a library. And then when a title caught my eye, I'd pick it up and look through it. And I was in heaven. When I finally came to, the area, and it's interesting because I'm not sure if this was in the science area or if this was in an esoteric area, but it was a very good book on alchemy. It might have been there are two covers that are very similar. One is by Titus Burckhardt, and I believe it's that one, which is, if you're wanting a very good history, a very good overview of alchemy, this work called Alchemy by Titus Burckhardt is quite good. He's part of an esoteric tradition, but also of high scholarship in terms of approaching the material. So when I came across this book, my interests were, as a child, still are, science and art, right? I used to create art, but fascinated by science. Here was a book that was like, it didn't fit, if you know what I mean. It's like, it's not science, really. Yeah, it is. No, look, it's art. Well, no, and this fascinated me. It annoyed me, and I kept going back to it because it annoyed me. And then from that point on, I was obsessed,
Yeah.
It's that way. When I graduated high school, I stayed out so I could go work at Weisser's bookstore in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
you're from that area.
I'm from New York City. Well,
me too.
Yeah, I'm from actually Mount Vernon, New York.
Yeah, I know Mount Vernon.
It's right on the border of the Bronx.
Exactly. I lived in West Harlem for a while. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. So as a kid, I found out about Weisser's during my library searches, and then used to hop the subway and go down and, kind of peruse the book. About 15, 16 or so. But then when I graduated high school, I figured, no, I need time to read. If I go to college, I'll never have time to read. All I'll be doing are the studies that I need to do for the degree. And it was like, I need time to read. And that's when I got real deep. And so this is like early 70s, mid 70s. I was working at Weisser's, and Frate Albertus's book, The Alchemist Handbook, appeared in manuscript at Weisser's. And I was
Wow.
working at Weiss's because they knew you had to have an area of expertise, and my area was alchemy. Um, and so when this came out, they were like, "Hey, Brian, take a look at this. Have you ever heard of this?" And it's like, well, rumor has it. And so I was able to see the galley proofs for it and was like, oh my God, this is it.
Wow.
Right. And then they published it. And as I started doing more experimentation. And then I realized I needed to go back to school and went for chemistry. So I did a major in chemistry, minor in physics. But at the same time, I'm doing experimentation in alchemy. I'm also making films, experimental films, because I love the art. So these are the mixes, right? And alchemy as a practice and a thing is this beautiful intersection of both practical work, inner work, memory work. I mean, just many, many, many factors come into this, right? How communication strategies, let's say, the use of illuminated manuscripts, illustrated manuscripts that aren't really illustrating, they're more in dialogue with the text, or the text is in dialogue with. So there's a whole other way of reading these things as well. So that's it in a nutshell, sort of the overall path, training, and obsession. The rest is details.
That's fascinating. That's a great origin story, especially because it's so cool that you worked at Weiser's. But yeah, there's definitely this I guess archetype among people interested in these subjects. Just anecdotally or as an aside, to this day, I will, without even buying anything, I'll literally just go to a library or a bookstore just to decompress, just to walk around and feel at ease. But so you have written quite extensively on alchemy. Actually,
some.
I did. Well, the thing that I feel like you do really well is that you tackle a lot of, or at least for me, I included one of your works in a video presentation that I did on alchemy in several parts. But I really liked how firm a hold on the basics that you kind of communicate in. There's a lot of insight. So I'm interested to know how your latest book on alchemy, essential practices, and making art and alchemy. How does that differ from your previous work on the subject?
No pun intended. It is a distillation. It is it. I had to. I do, but I did. But the title kind of says it all: essential practices and making art as alchemy. And so that really has been sort of the focus of my work from a very early period because of my interest in the arts, right? Making film, drawing, zine type stuff, collage type work, and all that kind of has parallels in alchemical language. But one of the stronger things that kept coming up and out was that alchemy is the art of arts. So if you think about that, meditate on that for a bit. In other words, it is the art. All its theory, all its flow, all its practice is essentially kind of saying, well, this is how pretty much all creation rolls, whether it's big creation or small creation. It seems to follow the same kind of flow, whatever language we may put to it, right? Ideas of circulation, of breakdown, of opening, of these types of ideas that you see in nature. And this is one of the things, is that it attempts a unified field theory, let's put it this way, both inner and outer. And this is what I feel its practice at its core has been, with various practitioners focusing more on one aspect or another, right? Perhaps I was really getting into material transmutational right? Such as Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, that were really, taking the theory and pushing it. And it didn't quite work out, so they changed practice, right? But the theory works, right? You break down what we see as compounds into elements, rearrange the elements, and you come up with something different. But the alchemists were working at a far lower energy level, let's put it this way. But the ideas are there. And so this is what it is. It's a questioning of nature, right? It's not so much that the alchemists of the past had discovered an answer. In my studies, in my work, it's more like they've discovered questions, right? That we try to then, they're cutting edge at that time, and then somehow we push beyond them, but a lot of that cutting edge still hasn't been really explored. And I'm not even speaking materially here, right? There is this aspect of, as you work with things exteriorly, we start to have an impact on our mind, on our dreams, on the way we understand things. Right? And this is where practice comes in, because what you practice with, you internalize. This is what the point of this whole book was, like, to get down absolutely to the essential practices that anybody making something, right? Because that's what alchemy, right? Oh, we're making something. We're taking this thing and we're transmuting it. But it's taking those ideas then and those practices, both inner and outer, and then applying it in a way, or talking about it in a way, that anybody who makes anything can use that practice as an alchemical practice. And that's what the book breaks down. So there's inner exercise, how to work with dream, et cetera, but tied into alchemical principles that have come out of my sort of 50 years, 60 years of research and work. So
yeah, that sounds great. I definitely, as I mentioned a little earlier, I've been studying this stuff for a really long time, and it wasn't until I began to dive into the theoretical side of essentially practical alchemy, right? Because spiritual alchemy, quote unquote, is sprinkled in all sorts of little works here and there, and it's highly obscure.
right.
And as I've mentioned in podcasts with other alchemists, it's kind of to parse that literature, that overwhelming amount of highly obscure and somewhat, pre-scientific, yet still it had its own jargon. It can be fairly impenetrable, but I think the work that guys like yourself and Robert Bartlett, of course, and even Mark Stavish have done to and Phoenix Aurelius. I mean, he's been great for a newer age of alchemists trying to sort of bring Spagyria in general, that Paracelsian thing, to the fore. But what it's done is it has made this stuff more accessible. And so to go back and study now, after all this time scratching my head over, like, the basic spiritual alchemical principles, to understand the theory has informed everything. I understand Hermetic philosophy now. I understand magic better now. I understand I garden. I understand gardening better. So
right,
it's really it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, because you start to see what they have is I wouldn't want to say simple, but there's a coherence to the symbol set. Let's put it this way. And this is like what alchemy claims is that its processes are universal. Right? It may manifest in different ways. You may use different names for it for different things, but the like alternation, right? Circulation. These kinds of concepts are at the core of the practice and theory of alchemy. The idea that there's substrata to things that after a point are no longer material, right? But yet create a material appearance. I mean, that's new physics. I mean, that's like Bose-condensate and particle interactions starts to create these things that when they get together, well, there's no there really. It just feels solid because of, strong electromagnetic fields and things. But really, it's not much there. But yet here we are, right? It is about an ascent to the one in the inner sense, through a descent through matter, right?
Mhm.
Using matter, using the material world as that point of departure. And it's very interesting when you start to look at a lot of the spiritual literature, because a lot of it does start out either with a death, a descent into the underworld, a dream state, things like this, where Dante is perfect, right? I awoke to find myself in a dark wood, and off he goes. And where does he go? Well, descends the rings of hell before coming out the devil's ass and begins his ascent. I mean, this is
Yeah,
alchemy,
yeah, yeah,
right?
it's true when you look at ceremonial magic.
Yep.
Iamblichus's theurgy espousing, no, we must
Oh,
start in the material, and then
absolutely.
centuries
Absolutely.
later you have Ficino and Agrippa saying the same
Well,
thing.
they're that's because they're reading the
Exactly.
implicates. They're up
Ficino
there. Exactly.
translated the, and then actually not only did Agrippa have recourse to the translated material, but he pulled a lot from Ficino's three books. But it's just
Exactly.
amazing because it's when you look from our modern, or I guess maybe I should say postmodern standpoint, magical standpoint, you kind of we're retrofitting a lot of things, and there's a lot of interpolations.
Hmm.
There's a lot of our own inability from our sort of entrained perspective lenses to meet these documents on, or really the authors who wrote them, to meet them on their own terms.
Right.
But if you really start to learn and study this stuff, you see that there is a through line, and it all boils down to, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of poetry, but for me, like, the skeleton of everything here, or maybe I should say the spirit of it all,
Hmm.
is contained within alchemical theory.
Right. And a lot of that is, especially the inner work, is rooted in Neoplatonism, is rooted in that sort of a tradition coming out of Iamblichus and getting amplified and moderated through the Renaissance Neoplatonists, like, as you mentioned, Ficino, Agrippa, basically everybody who was doing anything then.
Yeah,
Michelangelo, right? I mean, for real.
yeah.
Um, I mean, they're reading Ficino, they're working with his ideas. This stuff's entering into the emblem books that that then impact the artists, and the artists. It all intersects. The thing I'd like to
Oh,
point out with you bringing up Iamblichus is that this has such a hard. This is like, I feel, a lot of the roots, and this is where you'll see a parallel with alchemy, with the practice of iconography. Byzantine iconography, Byzantine Christian iconography. This is something I point out in the book and kind of show how a
mm,
material practice is actually can be used as a spiritual one. And the thing is, both alchemy and iconography have common roots in a spiritual tradition of Neoplatonism, as well as Egyptian material practice and spiritual practice, right? So
mm,
icons come out or have their roots in the Egyptian mummy tradition, mummy portraits. And you can see this as you trace it through to what's called the Fayum portraits, right? Late Greco-Roman uh, mummy portraits that look like icons because that's the roots of icons. But the material practice within there is the same. Also, the spiritual practices. Um, there's a very good writer, Dr. Gregory Shaw, who
mm.
writes on theurgy.
I had him on the podcast, actually.
Oh, fabulous. Hey,
Yeah.
folks, if you haven't listened to that podcast, after this, go listen because for real.
Yeah.
Um, because my area of research was alchemy.
Mm,
There's an icon studio here in New York City that I started to go to because my research through pigments, about pigments, led me there. This is at an Orthodox cathedral. This is serious iconography, right? So you're down in the basement, you're doing the icons, and there are, like, at lunchtime, there's a discussion over the theory, theology, philosophy, etc. And the more I was hearing, it's like, my God, this is alchemical theory. And then I started noticing, and I was reading, I have read Iamblichus, have read the Neoplatonists, but I never really read or studied Christian Orthodox theology or philosophy. And then I'm hearing this, and it's like, well, wait a minute, this sounds awfully familiar. And then I found an article that Dr. Shaw had written on Iamblichus and the whole, celestial hierarchy and the work of
Hmm.
energy, how this was edited out and called work of what have you, but real. And then he starts to underscore really well the roots of Iamblichus, right? So
Yeah.
my point is, if you really want to study Neoplatonic practice, is take a good look at the practices within the Orthodox Church. The use of image, incense, chant, all these things will start to enliven an understanding, I believe. Anyhow,
Yeah.
go check out his podcast.
That's, I mean, it's fascinating too, because I've on the channel I've done, I grew up Roman Catholic, but my father, his side is Orthodox. But needless to say, there was a lot of Christian ritual, highly
Sure,
ritualistic,
sure.
right? We're not Protestant, so there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
high ritual and crazy stuff going on. Uh, but so my a lot of the work that I've done, or at least some of it in terms of lectures, has been attempting to trace the roots, the Neoplatonic roots of Christianity, because the earliest church fathers, Origen, Tertullian, Clement of
Yeah.
Alexandria, they were all Neoplatonists. They were all like
Right.
Neoplatonists that then kind of, I don't want to say shoehorned, because I think that they had found a
Yeah.
reality. They
Well,
had
that's it.
found that.
It's an organic growth, and this is how it changes. And this is what you see when you study alchemy, because you can't just study the one text or that one author. You have to go deep into their context. Where did they come out of? Right? What
Mhm.
river are they swimming in? Um,
Yeah,
and you
yeah, and
really have to understand, because that is, I mean, that's the closest you can come to try to, as you were saying earlier, and I totally agree, of like taking the work on the worker's own terms, right?
mhm.
Yeah, we may have different insights later, but I mean, it's almost like we have to get out of the way and almost believe them when they say what they're saying. Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? It's not like,
yeah,
oh,
and
they mean something else. No, no, no. They actually
just
mean what they say.
leave it be, and suspend your need to project your judgment over it. But it's
Exactly.
because it will inform you. I mean, it's amazing too now, because here's the thing: I hadn't yet really come to this realization, like you're saying. You're kind of informing me here, which is this weird missing link that is so perfect
Mm-hmm.
about the idea of Neoplatonic traditions really influencing that spiritual alchemy. Because the interesting thing to me was, even back then, you had Tertullian, the Neoplatonist.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one who
Mm-hmm.
founded the doctrine of the Trinity, which he said, tria personae una substantia, three persons, one substance. That's the tria prima right there,
Right, right.
basically. That's like mind blowing.
Right, right.
So one thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because I had stumbled upon it in my research, and I'm sure that other people will be interested. So Kepri Press,
Yeah.
that's your independent publishing vehicle.
Yeah, that's me. That's where I kind of put out my madness. I,
Okay.
I don't, it's like I'm like the crazy guy on the corner with the table with pamphlets.
So
It's
when I
propaganda
mean, I
work.
see that
It's
I mean,
propaganda.
you have a quite a bit of stuff up there.
Yeah,
You
you
know
can't stop me.
what good man, right on. True New Yorker.
Yeah,
When did that
try me, try to stop me.
when did that
Walk
get
in here.
started?
I'm sorry.
When did all that get started? Has that been a thing for a long time now,
It's
or?
kind of been bubbling in the back, and then 2014 it became like a real thing. And
Okay.
the reason it became a real thing was I had just produced this very fancy high-end emerald tablet. It's a core. If you go to the website kepripress.com, you go all the way to the
Mhm.
bottom. There'll be some pictures there. Um, it's it to me. I think it's beautiful. It is an accordion. It's a concertina accordion fold, leather bound, gold stamped emblems of Islamic nature and a Carolingian nature.
Wow.
And what I did was I took the two earliest translations. The earliest version is an Arabic version of the Emerald Tablet, and there happens to be a Latin translation very early on of that same Arabic. So I'd studied Latin, I've studied Arabic, and was working with tutors, so I translated both of those. So they kind of mirror each other on the page with their English translations, and on the other side is a 6-page interpretation or commentary. And because it's an accordion thing, right, it just keeps on going in a circle, right? As you go to the back, it opens up to the next side. And so that was a thing that it was now out. It's a rather high-end piece. I did a leather edition of 29 and a silk edition of 71, right?
Wow.
The leather is just about the Getty Museum Special Collections Library bought one. National
Wow.
Institute of Health, the National Library has yeah, it's I'm really pleased with it. The
Amazing.
typesetting in the Arabic is phenomenal. It's a very unique, can't say that. It's a unique typesetting machine they use, which nothing like it. It's more calligraphic. Anyhow, so that's what started. I needed a place to kind of promote that and put that out, as well as then the other work I was doing with zines. And so anytime I make something, do something, on it pops. So
That's
folks,
great.
check it out. There you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I
So
also like to say too, just, for those overseas and around, Printed Matter Inc. This is a artist. It's a huge thing. If you're not familiar with it and you're interested in zines and ephemera, it's called Printed Matter. They distribute my work. So that's another place to go look if, mailing and shipping from the US is a little rough. Go to the website. I have some other sites there where you could purchase stuff from if you so desire.
with the Emerald Tablet, do I have it correct? Did you personally do a translation of the Emerald Tablet at some
Yeah, I
point?
did. I translated from the Arabic and I translated from the Latin.
So was that a project that you felt was like called towards of necessity as an alchemist to
Yes,
help
I
with your
did.
work, or?
Yeah, yes. And it was also a way for me to exercise the languages I was studying. Anytime I study a language, I try to find something I'm really interested in. So you have that motivation. And when I had first found the early Arabic version, this is from around the 8th century, and it's in the back of a work called The Secrets of Nature, attributed to Apollonius. And so when I found that I was studying Arabic, there was some phrases and words in there that kind of stuck out that seemed very different than some of the phrases I was used to hearing. And that phrase is, the key one is, as most folks are probably familiar with it, as above, so below, as below, so above. In the Arabic translation, what it says is the above comes from the below, and the below comes from the above, right? And the Latin translation of that is the same. The above comes from the below, and the below comes from the above. So what you have in one case is this idea of simile, right? That this is like this, right? And that there's a connection there. And there's a lot of Neoplatonic theory that this resonates with and is part of, right? So that translation is not that it's wrong, okay? However, the earliest translation I find to be extraordinarily interesting, because what it says is the above comes from the below and the below comes from the above. And what that's indicating is this incessant circulation, this incessant creation, destruction, recreation that goes on. And what was interesting, as I was working on the translation of this, or at the time was giving practical workshops on things, and a lot of it is, or was, trying to develop really simple equipment that people could just go put together in a hardware store or a kitchen supply store. So I came up with this thing with a martini glass and a mason jar. I get into that with the essential in the new book. It's described there. And so I was working with this idea of circulation, right? Where something evaporates, condenses, and drops back in on itself. And this is a way to, if you have stuff involved, it activates it. Let's just put it this way. So it's circulation, evaporates, condensation, and it falls. All right. So I'm working on the translation. I'm working on trying to develop this very simple system. I put alcohol in it. I put ice in the martini glass, the thing's sitting in there, and I turn on a low heat and I go back to the translation. And I'm working on it. I come back to check every once in a while, and I notice underneath the highest point of it is like this little cloud forming. And then it was really cool. I've been trying to photograph this, but I can't get the lighting right. Little drops started falling, right? And I'm thinking, wow. First thought I had is like, is there a leak? Right? Second thought was Big Rock Candy Mountain, you lake of, whiskey, and you can kind of paddle all around it. That was the second thought. The third thought was, oh, that must be coming from below. And I'm like, oh, you mean the above is coming from below? And this is what I'm working on in the translation. And I'm like, well, this is one of the key instruments in early alchemy, is the circulation device. So this reinforced that interpretation, right? It also reinforced through the rest of the Hermetic literature, which talks about the cyclic nature of creation, destruction, and ongoingness. It's not to say the previous one is wrong. It's like, who knows which one has precedent or anything else. But when you come across disparate interpretations, one may be right, one may be wrong. But again, it's like what you were saying, to leave something open, right? And to consider the both, because each one has something to say, right? You may ultimately, philologically or textually prove, we found the original, but until then, it's a way of studying and working with the text.
Yeah. I mean, I find that one of the main stumbling blocks in general is just, it's changing now, because there's kind of this explosion in erudition on occult topics.
Yes.
They're taking it more seriously in academia at the moment. But for a while, it was like one guy translated everything, like the 16 or like 17 or 1800s, and we were just kind of going off of that translation, which was incomplete and kind of archaic by our own standards. Another great example of that is the as we were saying before, is Agrippa's stuff. Recently taught a class on that, and I was using Purdue's translation. I was using the JF translation, and looking at the original Latin, and some words in the JF translation are completely wrong. They're not translated to any degree of accuracy.
Well, see, this is where it gets frustrating now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Except then, this is what the Elizabethan or the English maguses were working with.
Right.
And then they go, that's why it didn't work. He said this word, not that word.
Yep. I'm curious. It's something actually that I'm curious every time I talk to a practical or operative alchemist. Do you practice any kind of spiritual application? I guess maybe ceremonially in your practice, or is that something that
I don't do? It's not. I don't do any ceremonial, what have you. No, it's not that I consider myself an operative alchemist or what have you. It's no, I would actually say it's the other way around. I would say that it's like I am mostly focused on inner work, but the outer work is part of that inner work. It's like doing martial arts as an inner process, but you still got to go get punched in the face once in a while, right? Otherwise, how are you're blocking well? True. Badass. Boom, boom. Oh yeah. I'm very mindful in my badassedness. No, but seriously. And this is the thing I find with iconography, because it speaks of this material practice. As you are creating the layers, this is a representation, a mirror, right? With icons, icons are both a mirror and a window when you are creating one, when you are writing one, because that's what you are doing. You are writing with images, right? And what you are writing with images is, if you're a practitioner, You are writing the images of your soul, right? And you're looking through that frame, that's the painting, into the ideal of what you're wanting to achieve. So if you are looking through this window at an icon, the tracing of an icon of Saint Michael, the archangel, these are the aspects that are going to be reflected in that icon of your own soul. So as you're working on it, how the lights are coming through, how they're being obscured, how stiff the wings are, how the gold is adhering to the clay, are all statements about where you are in your spiritual evolution, and might suggest some practices that are needed through the guidance of your, well, spiritual teacher, guide, statets in the Orthodox tradition, your spiritual friend who will go, the gold's not adhering to the clay. What do you think that means if breath is soul? And then walks away, right? So this is the roots of alchemical practice. This is the material where you are creating something. But then the second thing that happens is where this work on the outside starts to appear. And the first place anything you do a lot of starts to show up in your dreams. And this is where the ascent begins. This is where the inner practice can begin. So whatever you're doing in the lab or the practice, if it starts showing up in your dreams, start doing it in your dreams. If you can awaken to that in your dreams, even more better, right? Really practice it then, and then see where that leads. And this is the thing with alchemical dream work. There are two directions. One is where you're working on a problem, and this you will find in early Greco-Roman alchemical literature, right? Saying these things, Zosimo says, saying these things, I went to sleep. And then he has this vision of out of the lab. This is that thing, saying these things, I went to sleep. That's the inner teaching right there, right? If you want to know how to do dream work, that's it. Saying these things, I went to sleep. So saying these things, he went to sleep. And then he came out with an answer, and he brought it into the day world to work. Another alchemical dream is when something happens within the dream world that goes, don't go that way, come with me. And now you're on your way. So it's only a dream, off you go. But this is where it starts to suggest itself. And this is where you will come up with some insights that you perhaps will come to eventually in the day world, but happens a lot faster in the night world. And so this is how I see the alchemical practice. For me, making a zine has that same materiality, has that same mind visualization process of bringing. As a matter of fact, I did a zine called The Mystic Magic Talismanic Alchemical Practice of Zine Making, where I break down that whole process by analyzing how I make a zine. So if you're interested, but that's it. You could take any process, any creative process, and use this for the inner work, right? And that's what the book on alchemy is about.
That's great. I mean, I'm at that point. I mean, I guess after enough time and enough practice, the alchemist becomes like this just living, walking process of conscious alchemy. You know, like I guess that's the ideal of the magician too. You know, to a certain degree,
is to become a competent human being, kind to others.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. No, for real.
Yeah. So what I've seen I don't know how tuned in you are to social media, and
not at all. So you'll have to clue me in.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was like, typically people who are not clued in at all are way better off. But what I've been seeing as a consequence of
we need people like you. We need folks on the front lines, the canaries in the cage. We thank you for your service. To warn the rest of us.
I don't know what the hell happened, because I mean, when I first moved down here to Asheville, I had a flip phone. I didn't have any social media, and here I am. I'm in the trenches. I'm in the cage, as you say. But what I've noticed is that there seems to be this explosion of interest in
Yes.
in practical alchemy, and you see it everywhere. There are these little boutique alchemical sort of artisans, and there's a lot of content, visual content, video content geared towards the alchemical experiments of whomever. So I was wondering, that and the explosion of interest in occultism, astrology is a big one now. What are your thoughts on some of that stuff, and how do you think it's possible to innovate at any point in these traditions?
Oh yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary that one innovates. Otherwise, you're just, I don't know, you're playing dress up and whatever. I mean, that's all
Cosplay.
cool. And nothing wrong with that. You got to start someplace and do so. We all do. But that's the thing. It's about bringing those outer practices inward. I mean, even with the ceremonial magic, if you start rehearsing this mentally, you will find that the results start to come before you even step into the ring, so to speak. Right? I mean, this is where you start to see it, where you begin to internalize it. That said, I mean, this explosion of interest is good. I mean, the more the better. What I would say though is reality testing. And because when you start getting a whole lot more, you start getting a whole lot more bullshit, right? And that's fine because, well, bullshit's a good fertilizer. This is where you need to be. It's true. It's where you need to be discerning and to have a discretion, right? It's like, I mean, this is my mom. Who benefits? Cui bono.
We bono. Yeah.
Right? Hey, who?
Yeah.
Right? That's like first question.
Yeah.
And it's not a cynical one. It's like, why are you doing? And this is what I say about anybody's own practice is and I mentioned this in the book as well, is to constantly ask yourself, why are you doing this? Right? Is it for ego stroke?
Yes.
You want to get back at your third grade teacher? Valid. Do you want to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you're saying. As a teacher in the Golden Dawn tradition, I that's something that I a lot of the students and the members of the Outer Order are very much to their chagrin. I'm constantly prodding them with that question and watching them squirm. And I think it's to check in constantly with your why. I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it actually changes. I think it just reveals itself to you. Layers of dross just kind of peel back, and you are suddenly.
Yeah. I agree.
But yeah, to your point, it's one of the most important things that we can do, and the most prerequisite is to know ourselves, really, truly.
But this openness to curiosity of like, yes, any time of great stress in the world, people go searching for things, and that's the simple explanation of why. And fine, what's wrong with that? And so if you do start questioning, and I'm not even saying one religion over another, one philosophy, one magical practice, whatever, but just, what is this? Who are you? And what are you doing here?
Right.
You know what I mean? And what are your plans? Are you a force for good? It's like, just what gives? And, it truly, an intellectual curiosity is fine. Power seeking can be fine. It's just that you want to have a little bit of a reality check there. And you also want to be going, okay, who's benefiting? And the more those numbers can increase, the more karmically secure you will be, because you will get slapped back. Right?
Yes, good, excellent point there. I wanted to just ask. I know we're getting to the end of our time here, but I wanted to mention that you have I guess sort of a project as well as a book called Alchemy, the Poetry of Matter.
Oh, right. Yes. The book is out, Alchemy, the Poetry of Matter. You can get that online, Amazon, but you can also directly order through me. It's a paperback as well as a hardcover. It's an alchemical book. This is my own. This is something that Kepri Press did, that meaning I did. So that's the synopsis of like the work as an alchemical book. What I talk about in there is more of, it's a little deeper, a little bit more at play, if you understand what I mean.
Mhm.
The On Alchemy, the essential practices, pretty much takes a lot in there and just really brings it down very simply, clearly. I do that in the poetry of matter as well too, but it has a lot heavier alchemical language involved.
Ah,
But yeah,
okay.
go check it out. I mean, you can get it through Kepri Press or Amazon or other places. The whole project that I call the poetry of matter is
Right.
just that, is this idea of an investigation into what is this thing called the world and what is this thing called change and transmutation. Poetry kind of comes out of the idea of, there's a dialogue in the symposium of Plato, and
Mhm.
Socrates is quoting his teacher Diotima. She's either a magician, philosopher, yes, all of those. And what she says is that someone, I'm paraphrasing here, but someone who creates something out of nothing, right, is a poet. And
Mhm.
the word poesis, it means a composition, right? And the Greek words for alchemy or transmutation involve that word. So it's either gold composition or silver composition. So it's this idea of composing with elements. And so that was an idea that I started diving into and wanted to explore, this idea within the arts of composition, and then how that reflects throughout the material world, whether we're playing with it as an artist or we're digging into it as a scientist.
Mhm.
So
Great.
check it out. It's
Yeah. Well,
and
I
also it has the translations of the Emerald Tablet that I did in the big fancy one, as well as three others. There's a
That's great.
shorter Arabic version by Jabir ibn Hayyan, and there's two other Latin ones that I've translated as well. So you have a chance to check my work.
Yeah, absolutely. Which obviously I highly recommend. I have a canned question that everybody gets, but
Okay.
I feel like we've covered. I usually ask people, like I ask guests if they could recommend three books for anyone. You know, us occultists and esoterics, we just love books. So,
Oh yeah.
uh, but we've covered a lot of your books. But I'm wondering if you have any other works that you or just in general references that you find highly valuable for the serious, somebody who seriously wants to
I
start
mean,
looking
for
into this
me,
stuff.
it is really the three books of life by Ficino.
Mhm.
That would be anyone really wanting to study alchemy, I think really needs to read this work, because what it speaks of is, it's not giving you recipes, it's not giving you processes, but what it's giving you is what you do with the results of those recipes, how you
Mm.
integrate these things into your life. So for instance, he will, right, his whole idea of it is to extend, is to make you healthy, not depressed as you age, so that you can continue with your spiritual work, right? So that's one book. The other one I would say would be, this is hard,
Yeah, it's a
because
spot
this is that,
question. I give it to everyone.
yeah, if you gave it to me at the beginning, I could like kind of think about it. Um, I would, it's something around Iamblichus, I would say. But I'm
Okay.
wondering if it's like, maybe Shaw's book on theurgy, I would highly recommend, just simply because that will give you a really good route into everything I was just talking about, how that intersects with Orthodox Christianity.
Mm.
Um, so that one. Oh, I got a third. Um, there is a work, and the name is escaping me right now, but it's by Mary Carruthers, and it's on memory. And it has to do with the books of the arts of memory. It's probably her second book. The first one is a really detailed examination of all the literature on the Ars Memoria from 400 to the 1400. Great
Mhm.
and detailed. Highly recommended if you're into it. Her second book is a more of a condensed and overview of it. I highly recommend this because what it deals with is the strategies of reading, of memorization, and the why, right?
Mm.
Forget about memorization as data retrieval. right? This is not what the memory work is about. It is not why you memorize pages and pages of scripture so that you can, it is so you can call it up, but it's not as data, right? When you've ingested these works, they live with you. There was a monk, John Cassian, from around the 3rd, 4th century that went around interviewing monks saying, what's your practice? And they were saying, it's like memorize scripture. Because what happens is you'll always have it with you to contemplate. And there are always those passages that we never understand. And then sometime when you're not really ready for it, you're doing something else, God reveals it. Sometimes even in your sleep, right? So this is what this book gets through. And you'll start to recognize practices there that as you read books or see copies of manuscripts and you see the images on the side, you'll start to understand what their function was for, right? So that would be the third one. I think that work in and of itself will open up a lot of people's practice. I'm working on the next zine right now on alchemy, the art of memory, and the architecture of initiation. I'm almost through with it. I'm hoping to have it out by October. So this gets into the whole memory work and history in a 30-page, 32-page zine. So and that one, that's the fourth one I recommend.
Yeah, great. I mean, that was my next question. My last question for you was, hey, do you have anything else that you're working on right now that you might want to, mention?
Yes, I do. I have something that's actually quite large that's about to get ready. And I've been saying this for the last 3 years, but this one really is because I've cleared out a lot of the other projects. It's an audio piece. It's a sound piece. I'm referring to as the Hymn to Hecate. I've done several zines that have been building up to this on music and alchemy, on the animation of statues, things like this. If anybody's interested, join the mailing list. Probably in about a month, I'm going to send out a mailing that's just going to specify this audio thing. And those who are interested, I'll be following up with that. So that's one thing I've been working on it for about 2 years now. I've only started recording the audio bits about 3 months ago. So it's off to a slow start, but it is moving. The other one is the rest of the series of zines. So the next one is on memory, one on healing, it's that myth, et cetera, et cetera. And and then I have a bunch of others. Yeah, there's always, I have a handful of smaller kind of works in the work. So sign up to the mailing list. I don't annoy people. I try not to. I only announce when a new work is coming out or if I give talks. And this fall, I'm going to be starting a round of talks again. Sort of seminars. Wow. One is on the Splendor Soulless, this manuscript. I do a 4-part talk on that. I do a 4-part on alchemy and myth, things like this. I do it on color symbolism and alchemy. So if you join the list, you'll get an announcement every so often, and it's at kepripress.com. But you'll post this stuff up, right?
I will, and I'm actually going to join your mailing list because I am still up in New York occasionally to see family. I was just up there recently, and I would love to be able to plan a trip up to attend one of your talks because I really, truly, I feel like you're just a font of insight.
Well, you come on up, just drop me a line, we'll meet up.
Awesome. Great. I really appreciate you giving me a little sliver of your day and being willing to.
It's been great. Love it.
Yeah, me too, man. So thank you so much for being on the pod.
And if you haven't, have you spoken to Seven, Marlene?
Actually, yes.
Oh, great. Good. Because I was going to say she's somebody else that's working in the same vein of art and alchemy. She's great.
All right. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you again soon.
I hope so, too. Maybe in the real world.